Hey everyone, thanks for being here with me tonight. Tonight we have 12 separate stories to go through. These cases come from all over the world, and they are all strange, dark, and very real. We are going to travel from the streets of London to the mountains of South Africa and the quiet neighborhoods of Japan. Each one of these accounts is a reminder of how quickly a normal day can turn into something entirely different. I am glad you could join me for this marathon of the macabre. Before we get into it, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy these stories, please gently nudge the like button. Maybe offer the like button a nice cup of coffee, but then replace the sugar with salt just to see the look on its face. Also, please comment and subscribe if you have not already. I love hearing where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Most importantly, please make sure your doors and windows are locked. Check your security cameras if you have them. You want to know you are truly safe before we begin. Outside your window, rain has started to fall. At first, it is just a few light drops on the glass. Then it turns into a steady, soft curtain of sound. That rhythmic tapping is going to stay with us as we move through the night. The camera pulls away from your room now. It travels through the dark, rainy streets and crosses the Atlantic. It flies over the choppy, gray waters of the Thames in London. We are looking down at a massive yellow construction vehicle. It is idling in the thick morning mist near a giant white tent. The heavy steel bucket of the JCB digger hangs low over the pavement. The engine produces a deep, rhythmic throb that vibrates in the damp air. Inside the cab, a man pulls a dark mask over his face. He is not looking at a construction site or a pile of dirt. He is staring directly at the reinforced side wall of the Millennium Dome. This is not a planned renovation or a city project. This is the start of the most ambitious heist in British history. The driver grips the controls and shifts the massive machine into gear. How did a gang of thieves think they could outrun the entire London police force using a slow boat? That is the question that would haunt investigators for years after this morning. The plan was so bold that it seemed like something out of a Hollywood movie. They were not going after a bank or an armored car. They were going after the Millennium Star. It is one of the most famous and valuable diamonds in the entire world. The audacity of the crime was only matched by the secret waiting for them inside. Months before the engine started, the members of the Dome Gang were meeting in secret. They spent countless hours studying the layout of the massive exhibition space. They knew exactly where the high-security vault was located. They also knew the schedule of the guards and the timing of the tourist groups. To them, the diamond represented a score of over £200 million. It was a prize that would allow them to retire in luxury forever. They just needed the right tools and the perfect moment to strike. Every day, thousands of tourists flocked to the Millennium Dome to see the glittering exhibits. The atmosphere was one of celebration and wonder at the turn of the new millennium. Children pressed their faces against the glass displays of rare gems. Security guards walked their rounds with a sense of routine and boredom. To the public, the vault seemed like an impenetrable fortress of glass and steel. No one imagined that a group of men was currently sourcing a stolen speedboat for a getaway. The gang finally secured the key components of their plan. They stole a powerful JCB digger from a nearby construction site. They also modified a high-speed boat with extra fuel tanks for a long run down the river. Every detail was checked and rechecked under the cover of night. They believed they had accounted for every variable and every possible response. The tension among the group was high as the date of the heist approached. They were ready to make their move on the 7th of November. The morning of the heist was cold and shrouded in a thick London fog. The digger accelerated toward the high-security vault with a roar of diesel smoke. It crashed through the outer perimeter fence like it was made of paper. The heavy bucket slammed into the side of the dome, tearing a massive hole in the structure. Inside, the sound was like a bomb going off. Dust and debris filled the air as the thieves jumped from the vehicle. They were armed and moving with military precision toward the jewels. What the robbers did not know was that they were not alone in their planning. The elite flying squad of the Metropolitan Police had been watching them for weeks. Undercover officers had infiltrated the gang's inner circle months earlier. They had set up a secret observation post inside the dome itself. Every meeting and every stolen vehicle had been logged by the authorities. The police were not just waiting for the crime to happen. They were orchestrating the perfect trap to catch the gang in the act. The thieves smashed through the inner glass of the vault using specialized sledgehammers. They reached for the Millennium Star diamond with gloved hands. But as they turned to flee, the staff inside the building began to move. These were not regular janitors or tour guides. They were elite undercover police officers who had been hiding in plain sight. They had been scrubbing floors and polishing brass for weeks. They were wearing heavy-duty police boots under their worker jumpsuits. The trap was finally being sprung. The scene inside the vault became a chaotic blur of smoke and shouts. The robbers tried to reach for their weapons, but they were already surrounded. Undercover officers tackled the masked men before they could take a single step toward the exit. The sound of flashbang grenades echoed through the massive tent. Smoke filled the air, making it impossible for the thieves to see their surroundings. Within seconds, the high-octane heist had turned into a complete and total rout. The criminals were pinned to the floor. Every member of the gang was handcuffed and searched within minutes of the breach. The Millennium Star diamond was still sitting in its display case, untouched by the chaos. The police had even swapped the real diamond for a high-quality glass replica days before. The thieves had risked everything for a piece of worthless crystal. The precision of the police operation was a masterclass in tactical planning and patience. The Dome gang had walked directly into a cage they didn't know existed. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about this. These men spent months planning every tiny detail of their escape. They had the boat ready and the route mapped out on the river, but they completely overlooked the people standing right in front of them. What if the gang had just checked the shoes of the janitor? They might have seen the heavy black police boots and realized the game was up. I don't know about you, but that level of oversight is truly incredible. The legal outcome was swift and very severe for the members of the gang. They were charged with conspiracy to rob and various weapons offenses. During the trial, the full extent of the police surveillance was revealed to the public. The ringleaders received sentences of up to 18 years in high-security prisons. The judge noted that the audacity of the crime required an equally strong response. The case became a landmark victory for the Flying Squad and a warning to other organized groups. The aftermath of the heist left a lasting impact on the city of London. The Millennium Star remains one of the most protected treasures in the country today. The story of the Dome Gang is still told as a legend of both criminal ambition and police brilliance. People still visit the site and look at the spot where the digger broke through. It serves as a reminder that the most dangerous traps are the ones you never see. The diamond still glitters, safe behind new layers of invisible security. The heavy steel tools used to break the vault were eventually discarded as evidence. One of those tools was a specialized diamond-tipped saw that looked like a regular piece of hardware. It was a simple object that represented a complex and failed ambition. That same sense of cold, calculated planning can be found in very different places. Sometimes the crime isn't a loud explosion or a crashing vehicle. Sometimes it is a quiet, statistical anomaly hidden inside a stack of colorful paper tickets. The loud roar of the diesel engine and the sound of crashing glass fade away. We are leaving the rainy banks of the Thames and the violence of a diamond heist. Instead of masked men and speedboats, we find ourselves in a very different environment. It is a brightly lit convenience store in Ontario, Canada. The air here smells like stale coffee and floor wax. There is no physical struggle here. There are no sirens or smoke grenades. Just the quiet sound of a small coin scratching against a piece of cardstock. A man stands at the counter with a stack of lottery tickets. He is focused on a small silver box on the face of the paper. This is the Ontario lottery system, a game of pure chance and luck. To the millions of people who play every week, it represents a glimmer of hope. They dream of a big win that will change their lives forever. But in this quiet shop, the game of chance is being replaced by something else. A statistical shadow is beginning to grow over the entire province. For years, the people of Ontario looked at the lottery as a beacon of fairness. They believed that anyone, from a teacher to a factory worker, could win. The system was designed to be completely random. Every scratch-off ticket was supposed to have the same odds as the next one. This trust was the foundation of the multi-billion-dollar industry. The government used the profits to fund schools and hospitals. It was a cycle of luck and community benefit that everyone seemed to accept. There was a specific family that owned a small retail shop in a quiet neighborhood. They were well known in their community as hard-working business owners. They sold milk, bread, and of course, thousands of lottery tickets. To their neighbors, they were just another part of the local scenery. They smiled at customers and helped them check their numbers after a big drawing. No one had any reason to suspect that a massive fraud was happening right in front of their eyes. The turning point happened when the family noticed a tiny physical flaw. They realized that some winning tickets had a very specific mark. This was a minute imperfection on the surface of the card before it was ever scratched. It was almost invisible to the naked eye. But if you knew exactly where to look, you could identify a winner. This secret knowledge turned a game of chance into a guaranteed profit. They began to pull these specific tickets from the rolls before selling them. The crime was not committed with a gun or a mask. It was a quiet theft of opportunity and specialized knowledge. When a regular customer walked in, the family would sell them the losing tickets. The winners were kept in the back or given to other family members to claim. This allowed them to collect massive jack pits without raising immediate alarms. They were essentially stealing from the very people who kept their business running. It was a cold and calculated betrayal of the public trust. An ombudsman eventually noticed something that defied the laws of physics. A statistical report showed that lottery retailers were winning at an impossible rate. The odds of a single family winning major prizes 5 times in a row were astronomical. It was billions to one. This was not just a lucky streak. It was a mathematical impossibility that demanded a closer look. An investigation was launched to see if the people running the game were the ones actually winning it. Investigators began to look into the physical manufacturing of the tickets. They discovered a technique known as pin pricking. This involved using a tiny needle to test the surface of the card in a specific spot. If the needle hit a certain layer, it indicated a high-value winner. This allowed corrupt store owners to pre-screen their inventory. They would keep the jackpots for themselves and sell the dross to the public. The scale of the manipulation was staggering and systematic. Imagine the scene in the shop during a typical afternoon. A regular customer hands over their ticket to be checked at the counter. The retailer scans it and sees a major win on the screen. Instead of congratulating the customer, they simply say it is a loser. They hand back a small $5 prize or nothing at all. Then, they keep the original ticket to claim the thousands of pounds later. It was a simple trick that relied entirely on the honesty of the shopkeeper. The conclusion of the investigation sent shockwaves through the entire country. A massive audit revealed that millions of pounds in prizes had been stolen. Dozens of retailers were found to be using these fraudulent methods to enrich themselves. The system that was supposed to be a game of luck was actually a rigged deck. The discovery led to a total overhaul of the lottery corporation. New security measures were put in place to ensure that winners were identified fairly. Now, let's look at this from a different perspective. I want you to really think about this. You go into a store and trust the person behind the counter with your ticket. You believe they are telling you the truth about your win or loss. But in this case, that trust was used as a weapon against you. They watched you walk away empty-handed while they held your future in their pocket. I don't know about you, but that quiet theft feels incredibly personal. The legal outcome involved a massive series of lawsuits and criminal charges. The lucky insiders were forced to return their winnings and face time in prison. The family that had won so many times was stripped of their assets and their reputation. The government was forced to pay out millions to the rightful winners who had been cheated. It was a long and painful process to untangle the web of lies. The era of the retailer win was officially brought to an end. Public trust in the lottery was shattered for a long time after the scandal. People became suspicious every time they handed over a ticket to be scanned. They started checking their own numbers, using self-service machines instead of relying on clerks. The OLG had to spend millions on advertising just to win back the confidence of the players. The story remains a textbook example of how a broken system can be exploited. It showed that even the most trusted institutions have hidden cracks. A photo of the winning family appeared in the local newspaper next to a large sign. In the picture, they are smiling and holding a giant check for the cameras. At the time, they were celebrated as the luckiest people in the province. Now, that same image is tainted by the knowledge of how they actually got the money. It is a hollow victory that ended in disgrace. The bright lights of the lottery stage were eventually replaced by the cold walls of a courtroom. That winning ticket eventually fell into a dark and muddy grave of evidence. It was a piece of paper that represented both a dream and a lie. The same feeling of being watched by something you cannot see exists in nature too. Sometimes the danger isn't a corrupt clerk in a brightly lit store. Sometimes it is the silence of a foggy cliffside where two people meet for the very first time. They are not looking for a prize or a win, but for an ending. We are moving away from the flat fields and quiet stores of Ontario now. The camera climbs higher and higher into the cold northern sky. We cross the vast Atlantic and find ourselves in a land of jagged stone. The terrain here is vertical and shrouded in a heavy gray mist. This is the Rogaland region of Norway, where the earth drops away into deep fjords. Below us, the wind howls through the narrow gaps between ancient mountains. It is a place of brutal beauty and terrifying heights. High above the Lysefjord, there is a massive natural plateau of solid rock. It is known as Preikestolen, or the Pulpit Rock. In February of the year 2000, the wind here was biting and sharp. A lone hiker reached the edge and saw something that did not belong. A small blue backpack was sitting completely alone on the very edge. There was a drop of 600 feet directly into the dark water below. No one was in sight, and the area was silent except for the wind. Inside the bag, the hiker found items that suggested a long journey had taken place. There were train tickets and a small camera tucked into a side pocket, but there were no identification papers or any signs of a struggle nearby. The presence of the bag was an invitation to a dark and silent mystery. It sat like a grave marker for someone who was no longer there. Why would someone travel all this way just to leave their belongings behind? The answer was hidden in the digital world. How do two people from different countries meet just to say a final goodbye? This question would stump the Norwegian authorities for several weeks after the discovery. They were looking at a case that had no physical struggle and no witnesses. The mystery of the backpack would eventually lead them back across international borders. It was a puzzle that started with a series of clicks on a keyboard. The investigation was about to reveal a new and dangerous side of human connection. To understand this tragedy, we have to go back to the year 2000. This was the era of the early internet and slow dial-up connections. People were just beginning to discover the power of global chat rooms. It was a time of excitement, but also of great and hidden danger. For most people, the web was a tool for information or simple fun, but for others, it was a place to find people who shared their darkest thoughts. The anonymity of the screen was a perfect shield. In Austria, a 24-year-old woman was living a life of deep isolation. She spent most of her nights illuminated by the blue light of her monitor. Her family thought she was just chatting with friends from school or work. They did not know she was frequenting boards dedicated to the topic of ending one's life. She was looking for someone who understood the weight she was carrying every day. She felt like a ghost in her own house, drifting through a world she did not love. At the same time, a 17-year-old boy in Norway was feeling the same way. He lived in a small town where the winters were long and very dark. His parents saw him as a quiet teenager who spent too much time on his computer. He was a bright student, but he struggled to connect with anyone around him. Like the woman in Austria, he sought refuge in the digital world of chat rooms. He was searching for a sign that he was not alone in his suffering. The two strangers finally met in a specific online forum in early February. They did not exchange photos or talk about their favorite movies or music. Instead, they spoke about the pain of existence and their desire to leave. They found a strange and immediate comfort in each other's words and dark promises. Over a period of several days, they formed a bond that was stronger than family. They decided that they did not want to do this alone anymore. The woman in Austria used her savings to buy a one-way flight to Norway. She told her parents she was going on a short trip to see a friend. She packed a small blue backpack with the few things she thought she might need. Her journey took her through multiple airports and long stretches of cold, snowy landscape. She was moving toward a person she had never seen in real life. Her focus was entirely on the plan they had crafted together in the dark. The boy in Norway met her at a train station near the coast. They recognized each other not by their faces, but by the shared purpose in their eyes. There were no long hugs or joyful greetings when they finally stood face to face. They were two strangers who had become partners in a very dark pact. They traveled together toward the famous cliffs of Preikestolen as the sun began to set. The path was icy and very dangerous for anyone who was not prepared. The crime scene was the breathtaking but deadly plateau of the Pulpit Rock itself. In the winter, the trail is often closed to tourists because of the ice. But these two did not care about the warnings or the lack of safety gear. They climbed for hours through the freezing mist and the howling mountain wind. They reached the flat top of the rock as night fell over the fjord. The water below was a black mirror that reflected nothing but the dark sky. Local police were called to the scene after the hiker reported the abandoned backpack. They began a search of the surrounding area, but the terrain was incredibly difficult. Divers were sent into the freezing water at the base of the 600-foot cliff. After several days of searching, the bodies of the two strangers were finally recovered. They were found close together at the bottom of the deep and silent canyon. The physical investigation was now turning into a digital one. The investigators found a series of receipts that led them to the young woman's identity. They contacted the Austrian authorities and gained access to her personal home computer. When they opened her browser history, the true nature of the trip was revealed. They found thousands of lines of chat logs that documented the entire plan. The messages showed a cold and methodical coordination of every step of the journey. It was a digital map of a double tragedy. The critical turning point in the case was the recovery of the boy's hard drive. Forensic experts were able to reconstruct the messages he had sent from his bedroom. The logs showed that the two had even discussed the weather and the height of the cliff. They had chosen Preikestolen because of its reputation for being a place of finality. The evidence proved that this was not a crime of violence by one person against another. It was a mutual agreement. I want to take a moment to look at the reenactment of those final steps. Imagine the two of them walking in total silence up that steep and frozen mountain path. They are strangers from different worlds, yet they are walking in perfect and terrifying sync. The wind is biting at their faces, but they do not turn back for warmth. They reach the edge and look out over the vast and empty fjord one last time. They leave the blue backpack behind and step into the void. Now, let's pause for a moment and really think about this particular case. The deep irony is that these two people finally found exactly what they were looking for. They found a soulmate who truly understood them and their deepest, darkest thoughts. They were no longer alone in the world because they had found each other, but they only used that beautiful connection to ensure they both reached the end. I don't know about you, but that fact is truly haunting to me. The legal outcome of the case was a quiet conclusion of double suicide by the state. No charges could be filed because both participants had perished in the event. However, the tragedy sparked an international conversation about the regulation of online forums. Families in both countries called for better monitoring of chat rooms that encouraged self-harm. The case served as a wake-up call for parents and authorities around the world. The internet was no longer just a playground. The aftermath of the Preikestolen Pact left a lingering shadow over the early digital age. It was one of the first major cases where digital footprints allowed police to solve a mystery. The blue backpack became a symbol of the anonymity and the isolation of the new millennium. It reminded everyone that behind every screen name, there is a real person with real pain. The cliffs of Norway remain a place of beauty, but they also hold this dark memory. A keyboard clicks rhythmically in a dark room like a steady and mechanical heartbeat. That sound once represented a bridge between two lonely souls in different countries. It was a bridge that led to a high and foggy place where the land simply stops. The same sense of hidden messages and secret lives exists in the world of high-stakes games. Sometimes the person you think is your partner is actually working for the other side. The secrets move from the mountains to a park. The footsteps on the mountains stop at the edge of the world. They do not lead back to a home or a warm bed. In the suburbs of Virginia, another set of tracks appears in the cold snow. A man in a dark suit walks through the quiet Foxstone Park. He stops at a wooden park sign and reaches into a deep pocket. He carefully places a piece of silver tape on the wooden post. This is not a message for a friend or a secret lover. It is a signal for a foreign power that a delivery is ready. The man is a ghost in a world of high stakes. Inside the halls of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a hunt was underway. The top leadership knew that a traitor was hiding among their own ranks. For 2 decades, the most sensitive secrets of the nation had been leaking. Every time the Bureau launched a new operation, the Russians knew about it. Every double agent they recruited ended up dead or in a gulag. The best mole hunters were assigned to find the person responsible for this damage. They had no idea that their target was one of their most trusted colleagues. How do you catch a man who knows every trick in the book? The person they were looking for was an expert in counterintelligence and tradecraft. He knew exactly where the cameras were placed and how phones were tapped. He was the one who designed the security protocols meant to stop spies. He was a master of the shadows, moving through the office with silent precision. His colleagues saw him as a stern and deeply religious family man. They never suspected he was selling their lives for piles of cold cash. The timeline of this betrayal stretched back for more than 20 years of silence. Since the late 70s, a mysterious figure known only as Ramon had been calling Moscow. This shadow had handed over thousands of pages of top-secret government documents. He provided the names of dozens of undercover agents working deep inside the Kremlin. He even gave away the plans for how the country would survive a nuclear war. The damage he caused was measured in lives lost and billions of dollars in technology. No one knew his real name. In his normal life, Robert Hansen was the model of an American patriot. He lived in a modest house in Virginia with his wife and 6 children. Every Sunday, he could be found in the front pew of his local church. He was a member of a very strict and traditional religious organization called Opus Dei. His neighbors saw him as a quiet and perhaps even boring government employee. He did not drive fancy cars or wear expensive jewelry to the office. He seemed to be the last person to ever betray his own country. But behind the closed doors of his home office, a different man emerged. Robert was deeply frustrated with his career and felt ignored by his superiors. He believed he was smarter than everyone else in the Bureau combined. He began to look for a way to prove his superiority and get paid. He made his first contact with the Soviet intelligence agency by dropping off a letter. He did not tell them his name or where he worked for the government. He only told them that he had secrets they would want to buy. The leaks grew more frequent and more damaging as the years moved slowly forward. Hansen handed over information about a secret tunnel built under the Soviet embassy in Washington. This tunnel had cost the United States hundreds of millions of dollars to construct. It was designed to intercept the most private conversations of the Russian diplomats. Because of Hansen, the Russians knew about the tunnel before it was even finished. They used it to feed false information back to the Americans for many years. It was a total failure. He also provided the names of 2 high-ranking Soviet officers working for the Bureau. These men were trying to help the United States stop the threat of war. Because of the information Hansen sold, both of these men were arrested and executed. They were taken to the basement of a prison and shot in the head. Hansen knew exactly what would happen to them when he typed their names out. He did not care about the human cost of his choices. He only cared about the diamonds and the cash he received. The FBI was living in a state of constant and suffocating internal paranoia. They knew there was a mole, but they were looking in all the wrong places. They even investigated a different innocent agent and nearly ruined his entire life. The real traitor was sitting in meetings, helping them plan the hunt for himself. He watched his friends and colleagues struggle to find the source of the leaks. He must have felt a dark sense of satisfaction as he eluded their best efforts. He was the fox inside the henhouse. The search for the traitor reached a critical peak in the year 2000. The Bureau decided to take a massive risk to end the leaks forever. They made contact with a former Russian intelligence officer who claimed to have proof. This man wanted $7 million in exchange for a trash bag of secrets. The leadership of the FBI agreed to pay the price and set up the exchange. They were desperate for any clue that would lead them to the man who was destroying their agency. They waited in silence. The bag was brought to a secure location and opened with extreme and careful caution. Inside were original documents that had been stolen from the Bureau over many years. There was also a tape recording of a phone call between the spy and his handlers. But the most important piece of evidence was a simple plastic garbage bag. Forensic experts were called in to scan the surface of the plastic for any prints. They were looking for a ghost, but they found a physical mark left behind by a human hand. The lab technicians found 2 distinct fingerprints on the edge of the plastic bag. They ran these marks through their massive database of every government employee in the country. Within minutes, a name popped up on the computer screen that silenced the entire room. The fingerprints belonged to Robert Hansen, a senior agent with a long and distinguished record. The investigators were stunned as they realized the monster was one of their own leaders. The man they trusted was the man who had been killing them. They also listened to the tape recording found in the bag from the Russian defector. The voice on the tape was cold and spoke with a very familiar and flat tone. It was a voice they heard every day in the hallways and in the cafeteria. There was no doubt left in the minds of the Special Task Force members. Robert Hansen was the spy they had been hunting for 2 decades of failed leads. Now that they had a name, they needed to catch him in the act of a delivery. The Bureau did not arrest him immediately after finding the prints on the bag. They wanted to make sure they had enough evidence to keep him in prison forever. They assigned a young and ambitious clerk named Eric O'Neill to work as his assistant. Eric was told that he was investigating Hansen for a minor security violation. His real job was to watch every move the older man made during the day. He had to be perfect because any mistake would alert the most dangerous spy in American history. Eric O'Neill spent months sitting just a few feet away from the man he was hunting. He watched how Hansen used his computer and how he organized his leather briefcase. One afternoon, Hansen left his office for a brief moment to go to the gym. Eric seized the chance and grabbed a small electronic device from the man's bag. He quickly copied the data and put the device back before Hansen returned to the room. The data contained a schedule for the next secret meeting at a local park. The tension reached a breaking point on the night of the 19th of February. The FBI surveillance teams moved into position around Foxstone Park in the dark. They watched as Hansen pulled his car into the small and empty gravel parking lot. He walked toward a wooden bridge with a heavy package tucked under his arm. This package contained microfilm with some of the most sensitive secrets in the world. He reached the bridge and placed the package in a prearranged spot on the ground. Hansen turned and began to walk back toward his car with a calm expression. Suddenly, the quiet night was shattered by the sound of shouting and bright lights. FBI agents swarmed from the bushes and surrounded the man who had been their friend. They threw him against the car and pulled his arms behind his back for handcuffs. Hansen did not fight back or try to run away into the dark woods. He looked at the agents and asked a single and chilling question. "What took you so long?" Now, let's pause for a moment and look at this from a different perspective. I want you to really think about this man and his choices. Human nature is a strange and often dark thing to witness in the light. Robert Hansen spent his entire adult life hunting people who were exactly like himself. He lived 2 completely different lives that could never be allowed to touch each other. I do not know about you, but that level of deception is hard to wrap my head around. Imagine the pressure. The legal outcome for the most damaging spy in history was a life of total silence. Hansen pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage to avoid the possibility of a death sentence. He was sent to a supermax prison in Colorado where he would spend the rest of his days. He was placed in a small concrete cell for 23 hours every single day. He was never allowed to speak to another prisoner or see the sun. The man who lived in the shadows was finally consumed by them. The aftermath of the arrest caused a total reconstruction of how the Bureau handles security. They realized that trust was no longer enough to protect the secrets of the nation. New protocols were put in place to monitor every agent, no matter how high their rank. The story of Robert Hansen remains a dark lesson in the dangers of the insider threat. He proved that the most dangerous enemy is often the one you invite into your home. The agency he betrayed will never be the same again. The agents who swarmed the bridge that night were finally able to close a painful chapter. They had captured the man who had caused so much death and confusion for 20 years. The package he left under the bridge was recovered and taken into a secure evidence room. It was a collection of microfilm that represented a final and failed attempt at betrayal. That same sense of a secret life being unmasked can be found in many different places. Sometimes the monster is not a spy, but a messenger. The cold silence of the park bridge is a world away from what comes next. Robert Hansen was a man of logic and cold, calculated numbers. He moved with a purpose that was grounded in reality and greed. But some people do not move in the light of the real world. They live in a place where the shadows have teeth and names. We are traveling from the suburbs of Virginia to the city of Duisburg. Here, the secrets are written in blood on the floor of a dark apartment. The darkness here is not about secrets, but about a terrifying and ritualistic madness. Police in the city of Duisburg received a tip about a strange smell. They expected to find a typical domestic dispute, or perhaps a squatter. Instead, they pushed open the door and saw something that stopped them cold. In the middle of the cluttered living room sat a full-sized coffin. It was lined with red satin and smelled of heavy incense and decay. A man was sleeping inside it with his arms crossed over his chest. He looked up at the officers with a calm and unsettling smile on his face. The room was filled with occult symbols and jagged knives. Did these people kill because they were hungry for blood or lost in a dream? That was the mystery that the German public tried to solve during the trial. The case of the vampire killers was unlike anything the city had ever seen. It involved a young couple who claimed they were not governed by human laws. They believed they were messengers for a dark and powerful master who lived in the shadows. Their story was a descent into a ritualistic madness that ended in a brutal sacrifice. They were not looking for money or power, but for a dark blessing. To understand how this happened, we have to look at how they met. Daniel Ruda was a man obsessed with the darker side of heavy metal music. He spent his time in underground clubs and reading books about the occult. He felt that the world was a hollow and meaningless place for him. He was searching for someone who could see the world as he did. In the late 90s, he placed an advertisement in a magazine for metal fans. He wanted a partner who was willing to walk through the darkness with him. He was looking for a soulmate. Manuela Ruda saw the advertisement and knew she had found her match at once. She had spent years traveling through the Gothic subculture of London and Germany. She claimed to have been bitten by a vampire in a dark club. She spent her nights sleeping in a graveyard to feel closer to the dead. Manuela believed that her soul no longer belonged to the world of the living. When she met Daniel, the two of them formed an immediate and terrifying bond. They decided that they would serve their dark master together for the rest of time. They lived on the extreme fringes of society in a small, messy apartment. They replaced their furniture with items that fit their dark and twisted aesthetic. The satin-lined coffin became their bed where they slept during the day. They covered the windows with heavy black curtains to keep out the sunlight. To their neighbors, they were just a strange and quiet couple who liked loud music. No one saw the altar they had built in the corner of the room. No one heard the prayers they whispered to the shadows while the city slept around them. The two of them became increasingly obsessed with the idea of a human sacrifice. They believed that their master was demanding a soul to prove their loyalty. They began to look through their small circle of friends for a victim. They were looking for someone who was weak or who had offended them. They did not want to kill a stranger in a random act of violence. They wanted the death to be a meaningful and ritualistic event for their cause. The tension in the apartment grew as they waited for the perfect moment. Frank Hagen was a friendly man who worked at a local car dealership nearby. He was a fan of the same music and had become friends with Daniel. He thought the couple was unusual, but he did not think they were dangerous. Frank was a kind soul who often tried to help others in need. He did not know that his kindness was being viewed as a weakness by the Rudas. They invited him over to their apartment for a night of music and drinks. Frank arrived with a smile, not knowing he would never walk out again. The night of the 6th of July was hot and humid in Duisburg. Frank sat on the couch while Daniel and Manuela played their favorite dark tracks. The room was lit only by the flickering light of several black candles. They spoke about their beliefs and the power of the master they served. Frank listened with a polite smile, thinking it was all just a theatrical performance. He did not see Daniel reach for a heavy hammer hidden under a nearby table. He did not see the sharp ritual knife that Manuela was holding behind her back. The attack was sudden and lacked any mercy or hesitation from the couple. Daniel slammed the hammer into the side of Frank's head with all his strength. Frank collapsed to the floor, confused and bleeding from the massive impact. Before he could cry out, the couple was on top of him like predators. They used the hammer and the knife to strike him dozens of times. They were not just trying to kill him, but to perform a specific ritual. The sounds of the struggle were muffled by the loud music playing in the background. Investigators later found that Frank had been stabbed 66 times during the attack. The number was not an accident, but a deliberate choice by the killers. They used a jagged knife to carve symbols into his skin while he died. They also used a small bowl to collect some of his blood for the ritual. Manuela later told police that they drank the blood to seal their pact. They believed that this act would grant them eternal life and great power. The brutality of the scene was beyond anything the police had ever encountered. The neighbors eventually reported strange smells and chanting coming from the small unit. They also noticed that Frank's car had been sitting outside for several days. Police arrived and found the couple still living in the room with the body. Frank had been placed on a ritualistic altar made of old wooden crates. The apartment was a scene of total and absolute horror that shocked the veteran officers. Daniel and Manuela did not try to run or hide what they had done. They seemed proud of the work they had finished in the dark. The discovery of a specific list changed the entire scope of the case. Police found a notebook that contained the names of 66 other people. These were individuals that the couple had planned to harvest for future rituals. The list included former co-workers, family members, and even some of their neighbors. It was a clear indication that Frank was only the first of many intended victims. The couple had been planning a massive campaign of ritualistic murder across the country. They believed they were building an army for their master. During the trial, the behavior of the couple was both bizarre and terrifying. Manuela arrived in the courtroom with her hair covering half of her face. She would frequently stick out her tongue and make devil horns at the cameras. She told the judge that she was not a murderer, but a messenger. Daniel sat beside her with a cold and detached expression on his features. They showed no remorse for the family of Frank Hagen who sat in the room. They seemed to enjoy the attention their horrific crimes had brought them. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about this. We all have a breaking point where reality slips away from us. For most people, it is a bad day or a loud argument. But for Daniel and Manuela, that point was a total departure from the human world. They let the darkness in until there was no room for anything else. I don't know about you, but the idea of that internal snap is terrifying. We think we are safe in our own minds until the shadows take over. The legal outcome for the vampire killers was a mix of prison and medical care. The court found that they were both suffering from severe and dangerous mental disorders. They were sentenced to indefinite psychiatric detention in a high-security facility. The judge stated that they were a permanent threat to the safety of the public. They would not be allowed to return to society until they were cured. Given the nature of their beliefs, many believe they will never be free again. They remain locked away from the world they tried to change. The aftermath of the Duisburg murder left a chilling reminder for the entire country. It showed how a dark subculture could be twisted into a deadly and ritualistic cult. The case of the vampire killers is still studied by forensic psychologists today. It is a textbook example of shared delusional disorder between two very disturbed people. The memory of Frank Hagen is honored by those who knew his true kindness. He was a victim of a madness that he could never have imagined. The apartment has since been cleared and remains silent. A single black candle burns in the corner of a dark and silent room. The flame flickers in a draft that no one else can feel or see. It is a small light that represents a very deep and ancient darkness. That same sense of a world being turned upside down exists everywhere. Sometimes the monster is not a couple in a dark apartment in Germany. Sometimes the danger is an army led by children who believe they are gods. We are moving from the ritual to the humid jungle. We are leaving the cold and flat plains of northern Germany behind us now. The camera climbs high above the European forests and begins a long journey east. It crosses the vast and dry deserts of the Middle East and India. Finally, it drops into the thick and humid air of Ratchaburi, Thailand. The air here is heavy with the scent of tropical flowers and damp earth. We are looking at a busy regional hospital on a bright morning. Everything seems normal until you see the group of men with heavy rifles. In the dense jungle across the border, two 12-year-old boys stand in the mist. They have long, dark hair and wear dirty camouflage uniforms that are much too large. These are the H2 twins, the legendary leaders of a group called God's Army. Their followers believe the boys are gods who possess incredible supernatural powers. It is said that bullets simply bounce off their skin during the most intense battles. This myth has turned a pair of children into the kings of a rebel army. The followers of the twins are mostly veterans of the long civil war in Myanmar. These men have seen terrible things and have lost everything they once owned. They were looking for a sign of hope in a world that had abandoned them. When they saw the twins, they believed they had found a divine connection. The boys were not just children to them, but warriors who were protected by spirits. They followed every order given by the boys, without questioning the logic or the danger. The boys were often seen smoking large cigars while they planned their next military moves. They lived a life that was a strange mix of childhood and brutal warfare. Their followers claimed that the twins had more than 100,000 spirit soldiers. This invisible army was said to protect the boys from any harm in the bush. This belief gave the human soldiers the courage to face much larger forces. They were convinced that as long as they followed the twins, they were invincible. The group was known for their extreme discipline and their strange, ritualistic behaviors. They believed that if they followed specific rules, they would be granted supernatural strength. They prayed together every morning before the sun rose over the jungle canopy. The twins would bless the weapons of the soldiers with holy water and smoke. This created a sense of fanatical devotion that was unlike any other rebel group. They were a small force, but their reputation for bravery was known. Inside the Ratchaburi Regional Hospital, the morning routine is suddenly shattered by violence. 10 heavily armed gunmen storm through the main entrance with their weapons raised high. They quickly move to secure the doors and windows of the entire medical facility. 800 people are trapped inside, including doctors, nurses, and very sick patients. The gunmen begin to lay out explosives and tripwires across the polished tile floors. It is the start of a standoff that will grip the world. How did a group of professional soldiers end up following two children into death? This is the central mystery that baffled intelligence agencies during the long hospital siege. The 82 twins were not just figureheads for the older men in the group. They were the actual tactical leaders who made the final decisions for their unit. Their followers believed that the boys could see into the future. This absolute faith led them to take a risk that seemed like a suicide mission to others. The story began deep in the mountains of Myanmar during a long and bloody civil war. The Karen people had been fighting for their own land for many decades. The twins were born into this chaos and lost their home at a young age. Legend says they led a successful counterattack against government troops when they were 9. This single event created a myth that spread like wildfire through the local villages. Soon, a dedicated group of fighters gathered around the boys in the jungle. On the morning of the 24th of January, the hospital was full of life. Doctors were making their rounds, and families were visiting their loved ones in the wards. There was no warning that a group of guerrillas was crossing the border into Thailand. The patients were focused on their recovery, and the staff was busy with their daily duties. It was a place of healing that was about to be turned into a fortress. The humidity of the morning made the air feel thick. The 10 gunmen had traveled through the jungle for several days to reach the town. They were part of the core group of God's Army, who were loyal to the twins. Their goal was not to hurt the civilians, but to demand medical aid for their people. They felt that the world had ignored their struggle and their suffering for too long. They believed that taking hostages was the only way to get the attention they needed. They were desperate men who were willing to die. The trigger event happened when the rebels hijacked a public bus to enter the city. They forced the driver to speed toward the gates of the regional hospital complex. Once they crashed through the security barrier, they jumped out with their rifles ready. They fired into the air to create panic and clear the way for their entrance. Within minutes, they had control of the main lobby and the emergency room area. The staff and patients were forced onto the cold, hard floors. The terror inside the building was immediate and overwhelming for the 800 hostages. The gunmen were dressed in mismatched camouflage and wore bandanas over their lower faces. They shouted orders in a language that most of the Thai patients did not understand. Many people feared that they would be executed right there on the hospital floor. The rebels began to move through the hallways, locking doors and barricading the stairwells. The hospital was now a cage under rebel control. The crime scene was a nightmare for the police units that began to arrive. The gunmen had placed landmines around the perimeter of the hospital building. They also rigged several sets of oxygen tanks to explode if anyone tried to enter. The rebels used the hostages as human shields by placing them near the windows. This made it impossible for snipers to get a clear view of the targets inside. The entire facility was a web of traps and high tension that day. The investigation into the identity of the gunmen began as soon as the area was closed. Thai intelligence officers recognized the specific insignias worn by the group on their sleeves. They realized that they were dealing with the most fanatical wing of God's army. They also knew that the H2 twins were likely waiting just across the border in Myanmar. This meant that the gunmen were acting on a divine order. The situation was far more complex than a simple criminal act or robbery. The demands of the rebels were relayed through a doctor who was used as a messenger. They wanted the Thai government to provide medical supplies for their jungle base. They also demanded that the military stop shelling their positions near the border of the country. If their conditions were not met, they threatened to blow up the entire hospital building. They seemed completely indifferent to their own safety as the hours ticked by. They were waiting for a miracle from their kings. As night fell, the twins remained hidden in their secret camp deep in the jungle. They were only 12 years old, but the weight of 800 lives was on them. They believed their spirit army would protect their soldiers who were inside the hospital walls. Back in the city, the Thai generals were losing their patience with the long negotiations. They did not want to show weakness to a group of rebels led by children. The order was given to prepare for a response. Negotiation teams tried to convince the gunmen to release the children and the elderly first. The rebels refused, saying that everyone inside was part of their protection from the army. The atmosphere inside the wards was growing increasingly desperate as the heat rose in the rooms. Patients who needed regular care were starting to suffer without their medications or equipment. The doctors were doing their best to help, but they were under the constant watch of heavy rifles. The critical turning point came when the rebels set a final deadline for their demands. They stated that if the shelling across the border did not stop, the killing would start. Thai special forces had been practicing a raid on a nearby model of the hospital. They were waiting for the precise moment when the gunmen would be at their most tired. The sun began to set on the second day, and a plan was finalized by the commanders of the elite tactical units. The reenactment of the raid began at precisely 4 o'clock on Tuesday morning. Teams of elite commandos moved toward the hospital, using specialized equipment to remain silent. They used ladders to reach the upper floor windows that were not heavily barricaded. Other teams moved through the underground service tunnels to bypass the landmines on the lawn. They were wearing night vision goggles and carrying silenced weapons. The entire operation was timed to the exact second. The pre-dawn darkness was suddenly broken by the sound of small, controlled explosions. The Special Forces teams blew the locks off the service doors and swarmed into the hallways. They moved with incredible speed and precision, clearing each room in a matter of seconds. The gunmen were caught completely off guard as they were resting in the lobby. They tried to reach for their rifles, but the commandos were already on top of them with their weapons and flashlights. The flash of the muzzles illuminated the hallways like a series of violent lightning strikes. The rebels fought back with desperation, but they were no match for the elite Thai units. One by one, the 10 gunmen were neutralized before they could trigger any of the explosives. The hostages were told to stay down on the floor as the commandos moved over them. The smell of gunpowder and sweat filled the air that usually smelled of clean hospital bleach and medicine. The conclusion of the raid was a total victory for the Thai military and the police. All 10 of the gunmen who had stormed the building were killed in the exchange. Remarkably, none of the 800 hostages were killed or seriously injured during the raid. The booby traps were carefully dismantled by bomb disposal teams over the next few hours. The relief felt by the staff and patients was overwhelming as they were led out of the building into the fresh air. The aftermath for the hostages was a long road of trauma and psychological recovery. Many people who were in the hospital that day could never return to the facility again. They were haunted by the image of the gunman and the constant threat of a massive explosion. The Thai government was praised for the success of the raid, but criticized for the outcome. All the rebels had been killed, leaving no one to stand trial for the crimes that were committed that day. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about those 2 boys. What if they had never been told they were divine or that they were gods? Imagine if they were just allowed to be 12-year-old children who played in the dirt. Instead, they were given the power of life and death over hundreds of people. I don't know about you, but that fact really sends chills down my spine. We create these young monsters and then act surprised by them. The legal outcome for the twins took another year to reach a final and strange conclusion. Johnny and Luther Haytu eventually realized that their spirit army was not coming to save them. They were cold, hungry, and exhausted from living in the deep jungle on the run. In early 2001, the 2 boys walked out of the forest and surrendered. They were taken into custody and given a chance to live as normal people for the first time in their lives. The final aftermath of the hospital siege was the end of the myth of God's army. The twins were eventually resettled in other countries to start their lives over in private. The bulletproof leaders were revealed to be just 2 boys who were caught in a war. The hospital in Ratchaburi was repaired and returned to its primary mission of healing. But if you look closely at the walls, you can still see where the bullets hit during the battle. The commandos who took part in the raid were some of the most highly trained. They had practiced the mission hundreds of times in a secret facility near the coast. They knew every hallway and every doorway of the hospital by heart before they arrived. Their success was not a matter of luck, but of endless repetition and perfect discipline. They moved as a single organism through the dark corridors to save the 800 people trapped inside. The gunmen themselves were younger than many of the hostages had first believed that day. Most of them were in their late teens or early 20s with little education. They had spent their entire lives in the jungle, fighting a war they did not understand. Their devotion to the twins was their only source of meaning in a harsh world. When the bullets started flying, they did not run away or try to hide from the death they believed was holy. The hospital staff showed incredible bravery during the 2 days they were held in captivity. Nurses continued to care for their patients, even while guns were pointed at their heads. Doctors performed emergency procedures in the hallways with the limited supplies they had available. They were the true heroes of the standoff, keeping the peace when everything was falling apart. Their dedication to their duty saved many lives before the military even arrived at the scene. The 8-2 twins were eventually separated during their transition to a new life in the West. One moved to New Zealand, while the other remained in the region for several years. They were given new identities to protect them from those who still wanted revenge. The myth of the bulletproof boys was replaced by the reality of 2 men seeking peace. They had lived more in 12 years than most people do in an entire lifetime in the modern world. The artifacts of the siege are now stored in a small museum near the border. You can see the dirty uniforms and the homemade grenades used by the rebels there. These objects tell the story of a group that believed they were fighting a holy war. They are a silent witness to the desperation that leads men to take such massive risks. The museum is a quiet place where people go to reflect on the nature of conflict and human belief. The sunset over Ratchaburi today is beautiful and peaceful. Unlike the morning of the raid, the hospital is filled with the sound of new life and the hope of healing. The shadows of the past are long, but they are slowly fading into the light. We are moving toward the final stories of the night as the rain continues. The journey is far from over, and the next case is waiting for us. The neon lights of the city are calling. A child's toy lies next to a heavy assault rifle in the tall green grass. This image represents the end of a very strange and violent chapter in history. The humid air of Thailand is full of secrets that are finally coming to light. But as we move from the jungle, the neon lights of a different city begin to flicker. We are leaving the chaotic violence of an army for a different kind of predator. He stays in the city with a ledger. The neon lights of Tokyo are not like the jungle sun. They are cold and artificial, and they hide things that prefer the dark. We are moving from the humid hills to the crowded streets of Roppongi. A bright blue British passport lies on the floor of a messy apartment. It belongs to a young woman who thought she was starting a new life. The owner of the passport has been missing for over 24 hours. Her friend is looking at the door, waiting for it to open. Lucy Blackman was a 21-year-old flight attendant from England. She had traveled to Japan to see the world and earn some extra money. Tokyo was a city that never seemed to sleep or even slow down. Lucy found a job as a hostess in the famous Roppongi district. She worked at a club where men paid for conversation and drinks. It was a world of high fashion and very expensive champagne bottles. Lucy was young and full of life and very excited for the future. In the year 2000, the hostess culture was a massive part of Tokyo life. Young women from all over the world came to work in the clubs. They were paid well to sit with businessmen and listen to their stories. For most of the women, it was a safe and very lucrative job. They would wear beautiful dresses and spend their nights in high-end bars. The rules of the clubs were strict to ensure the safety of the staff. No one expected a predator to be hiding in the middle of it. Lucy shared a small apartment with her best friend, named Louise Phillips. On the 1st of July, Lucy told Louise she was going on a date. She said she was meeting a wealthy businessman who had visited the club. He had promised to take her for a drive in his nice car. Lucy was dressed up and seemed to be in a very good mood. She promised to call Louise later that evening when the date was finally over. She walked out the door and into the busy city streets. Louise waited for the phone to ring throughout the long and quiet night. By the next morning, there was still no word from her best friend. This was completely out of character for Lucy, who was always very responsible. Louise called Lucy's mobile phone, but it went directly to the voicemail. She began to check the local hospitals and even the police stations nearby. No one had seen a young British woman matching her friend's description. The silence in the apartment felt heavy and very wrong. Louise eventually received a strange phone call from a man she did not know. The caller claimed that Lucy had joined a religious cult in the mountains. He told Louise not to worry because Lucy was happy and safe now. This sounded like a lie designed to stop any further search for her. Louise knew her friend would never join a cult without telling her first. She contacted Lucy's family in England and told them to come to Tokyo immediately. The investigation was about to become an international news story. Tim Blackman, Lucy's father, arrived in Japan just a few days later. He was a man of great determination who refused to stay quiet. He held a press conference and offered a large reward for any information. The local police were initially slow to react to the report of disappearance. They often viewed hostesses as women who simply moved on to different jobs, but Tim refused to let the case be ignored by the Japanese authorities. He put immense pressure on the British Prime Minister to get involved. The search for Lucy became the largest hunt for a foreigner in Japan's history. Thousands of posters with her face were plastered all over the city of Tokyo. Digital billboards in the train stations showed her image to millions of commuters. Tim walked the streets of Roppongi every night, asking people if they saw her. He even hired private investigators to look into the clubs she had visited. The pressure from the media forced the police to start a massive task force. Investigators began to look at the regular customers of the Casablanca club where Lucy worked. They were looking for a wealthy man who drove a very distinctive car. Several other hostesses remembered a man who often invited women for private dates. He was known for being very polite, but also very persistent with his offers. This man lived in a luxury apartment complex near the coast of the country. His name was Joji Obara, and he was a very successful property developer. The police learned that Obara had multiple properties and many high-end luxury cars. He was a man of extreme wealth who lived a very secret life. When they first questioned him, he denied ever meeting a woman named Lucy. He claimed he was at his seaside apartment in Zushi on that night. but the police found records of his mobile phone, pings in a different area. These pings placed him near the apartment where Lucy was last seen alive. They began to dig deeper into his past and his finances. Detectives discovered that Joji Obara had a history of using different names and aliases. He was a master of deception who had built a wall around his identity. They obtained a warrant to search his luxury apartment overlooking the dark blue ocean. Inside, they found a massive collection of videotapes and professional camera equipment. It looked more like a film studio than a home for a businessman. They also found a supply of powerful sedatives and various medical journals. One of the most disturbing items found was a small handwritten notebook in a desk. It was a ledger that contained the names of over 200 women. Next to each name were dates, times, and very specific chemical formulas. It looked like a log of drug drinks given to unsuspecting women. The police realized they were not looking for a simple kidnapper or thief. They were dealing with a serial predator who had been operating for many years. Obara was a monster hiding behind a business suit. The investigation led the police to a seaside cave in the town of Miura. It was a rugged and isolated spot where the tide would often hide the entrance. For several days, forensic teams sifted through the wet sand and the cold rocks. They were looking for any sign of a human remains or personal belongings. The smell of salt and decay was very strong inside the dark cavern. They finally found a plastic bucket that contained the remains of a young woman. The remains were taken to a lab for an immediate and detailed DNA test. The results confirmed what everyone had feared for many long and painful months. The body belonged to Lucy Blackman, the flight attendant who had gone on a date. Her remains had been treated with chemicals to make identification nearly impossible for police. It was a cold and methodical attempt to erase her from the entire world. The discovery caused a wave of grief and anger across 2 different countries. Joji Obara was arrested and charged with the abduction and death of Lucy Blackman. During the trial, many other women came forward to tell their own stories. They described waking up in his apartment with no memory of the previous night. They had been drugged and assaulted while they were completely unconscious and helpless. Obara had recorded these attacks on his videotapes to keep as trophies of his crimes. He sat in the courtroom with a blank and completely emotionless face. The reenactment of the crime showed a terrifying pattern of professional predatory behavior. Obara would invite women to his apartment for what seemed like a normal drink. He would then slip a powerful sedative into their wine when they looked away. Once they were unconscious, he would carry them to a soundproofed room in the back. He spent hours performing horrific acts while the women were unable to fight back. He believed his wealth and his power made him completely untouchable by law. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about the father in this case. Tim Blackman spent every penny he had to find the truth about his daughter. He refused to let her memory be buried in a cave or forgotten by police. He challenged an entire legal system in a foreign land just for justice. I don't know about you, but that kind of love is truly powerful. He was a peer to every parent who has ever feared for their child. The legal outcome for Joji Obara was a complex and very long series of trials. He was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment for multiple counts of rape and assault. Remarkably, he was initially acquitted of the direct murder of Lucy Blackman due to evidence. The court stated that they could not prove exactly how she had died that night. However, a later appeal found him guilty of the dismemberment and abandonment of her body. He will spend the rest of his life behind the bars of a cell. The aftermath of the case led to a massive shift in how Japan investigates crimes. The police were criticized for their handling of cases involving foreign nationals and hostesses. New protocols were created to ensure that missing persons reports are taken seriously immediately. The case also raised awareness about the dangers of the hostess industry for young women. Lucy's family started a trust to help other families in similar tragic situations. Her name became a symbol for the fight against systemic police failure. The tide in the cave at Miura still comes in and out every single day. The entrance is often hidden by the dark water and the thick coastal fog. It is a quiet and lonely place that held a very dark secret for months. That secret was only revealed because a father refused to stop looking for his child. That same sense of a search and a failure can be seen on television. Sometimes the whole world is watching a tragedy unfold in real time on a bus. A small handwritten notebook with names and dates sits on a shelf in a lab. It is a physical record of a predator who thought he was a genius. The pages are filled with the evidence of lives that were changed forever in a night. This ledger is a final and damning testament to a man who lived a lie. But as we leave the neon of Tokyo, we see a different kind of screen. A television glows in a dark room, showing a bus in Rio. The neon glow of Japan fades into a bright and punishing sun. We leave the silent caves of the coast for a crowded street. The camera travels thousands of miles to the city of Rio de Janeiro. It is a hot afternoon on the 12th of June in 2000. The air is thick with the smell of car exhaust and salt. A man stands on a public bus with a silver pistol in his hand. He is pressing the barrel against the temple of a young woman. Millions of people are watching this happen on their television screens. Inside the bus, a woman reaches into her purse for a tube of lipstick. She does not use it to fix her face in the heat. She leans toward the glass window and begins to write a message. The letters are red and shaky as she presses them against the glass. She writes that the man has a gun and he will kill. The crowd outside gasps as the message becomes clear to the cameras. This is not a movie or a scripted drama for the public. It is a live hostage crisis unfolding in the middle of a street. When the whole world is watching, why did the police make every possible mistake? This question would haunt the city and the nation for many years to follow. The standoff lasted for 4 long and agonizing hours in the afternoon heat. Every word and every movement was broadcast to a captive and horrified audience. The police were surrounded by reporters and thousands of angry and shouting civilians. They had the training and the tools to end the crisis quickly. Yet, a series of failures led to a truly tragic and bloody conclusion. To understand the man on the bus, we must look at his past. Sandro Rosa do Nascimento was a survivor of a terrible and dark event. In the year 1993, he was present during the Candelaria massacre. This was a night when police opened fire on homeless children sleeping. Sandro watched his friends die on the street while he hid in shadows. He grew up in a world that offered him no safety or hope. The system that was supposed to protect him had tried to kill him. This trauma shaped him. On the morning of the crisis, the passengers on bus 174 were normal. They were students and office workers, heading home for a quiet evening. They sat in the blue plastic seats and looked out at the city. The bus was a place of routine and ordinary life for the people. No one paid much attention to the thin man who boarded the vehicle. He looked like many other people struggling to survive in the crowded streets. The ride was expected to take only a few more minutes for the riders. Sandro pulled out a weapon and announced a robbery to the terrified passengers. He wanted money and jewelry to pay for his survival in the city. But the driver of the bus saw a police car nearby. He slammed on the brakes and signaled for help to the officers. The police quickly surrounded the bus and blocked all the exits on the road. Sandro realized he was trapped and panicked as the sirens began to wail. He grabbed a hostage and used her as a human shield. The robbery had become a long standoff. The interior of the bus became a sweltering and high-tension cage for hours. The air conditioning was off, and the sun beat down on the roof. The hostages were forced to sit on the floor in the narrow aisles. Sandro paced back and forth, waving his pistol and shouting at the crowd. He was clearly unstable and fueled by a deep and boiling resentment. He made the hostages write messages on the windows for the news cameras. The bus was no longer a vehicle, but a stage for his personal pain. Negotiators from the elite police units arrived and tried to talk to the gunman. They realized that Sandro was not a professional criminal with a clear goal. He was a desperate and broken man who felt backed into a corner. He demanded a new bus and a way to escape the police perimeter. The officers tried to calm him down and build a sense of trust. But the presence of the television cameras made the situation much more difficult. Sandro was performing for the audience as much as he was negotiating. The police spent hours trying to profile the man and understand his true motive. They learned about his history and the trauma of the street massacre years before. This information helped them realize that he was looking for a sense of power. He felt that the world finally had to listen to his voice today. The negotiators tried to keep him talking to prevent a sudden burst of violence. Every minute that passed, increased the danger for the people trapped inside the bus. The heat was making everyone very irritable. Outside the bus, thousands of people gathered to watch the live drama unfold. They were shouting at the police and at the gunmen through the windows. The reporters were pushing their cameras as close as they possibly could to the bus. This created a chaotic and very unmanaged environment for the elite tactical units. The commanders were under immense pressure to end the situation without any bloodshed. They had to balance the safety of the hostages with the public image. The entire world was judging every move they made. A sniper from the elite unit had a clear shot at the gunman. He was positioned on a nearby building with a perfect view of the target. He radioed his superiors and asked for permission to take the final shot. He could have ended the crisis in a single second with one pull, but the commanders told him to hold his fire and wait for orders. They were afraid of the public reaction if they killed a man on live television. They chose to continue the negotiation instead of using any force. The sniper watched through his scope as Sandro grew more and more violent. The gunman began to hold the pistol to the hostage's head more frequently. He was screaming at the cameras and threatening to end everything right then. The tactical team was ready to move in, but they were held back. The lack of a clear and decisive order created a dangerous and unstable delay. The opportunity to end the standoff safely was slowly slipping away from them. The sun was beginning to dip below the city skyline. After 4 hours of tension, Sandro decided to exit the bus with a hostage. He wrapped his arm around her neck and held the gun to her face. He used her as a physical shield as he stepped onto the asphalt street. The police units moved in closer, but they were disorganized and very nervous. An officer from the special unit ran toward Sandro with a machine gun. He was trying to get a close-range shot at the gunman's head. The crowd screamed as the two men faced each other on the road. The officer fired his weapon, but he was startled by a sudden movement from Sandro. The bullet missed the gunman and hit the young hostage in the chest. Sandro reacted by firing his own pistol into the woman as they fell. The two of them collapsed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The scene was a chaotic mess of gunfire and shouting from the police. The news cameras captured every second of the failure for the entire world. The hostage lay still on the hot pavement of the busy street. Police swarmed the gunman and pinned him to the ground with great force. The crowd was furious and tried to break through the line to reach him. They wanted to take their own justice on the man who killed the woman. Sandro was tossed into the back of a police van to be taken away. The hostage was rushed to a nearby hospital, but it was already too late. She had been hit by bullets from both the officer and the gunman. Both the victim and the perpetrator would not survive today. Sandro died in the back of the police van while being transported to the station. The official report stated that he had died from a lack of oxygen. Many people believed that the police had strangled him as revenge for the shooting. The death of the gunman only added to the controversy and the public anger. A routine robbery had turned into a double tragedy that could have been avoided. The images of the day were burned into the memory of the city. The failure was total and very public for everyone. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about the deep irony here. The presence of the television cameras was supposed to be a layer of protection. It was meant to keep the police honest and the gunman under a global watch. But in reality, those cameras were the very thing that caused the hesitation. The fear of looking bad on a screen led to the death of an innocent. I don't know about you, but that fact is truly haunting to consider. We watched the disaster happen. The legal outcome of the crisis was a series of trials for the police involved. The officer who fired the first shot was eventually cleared of any criminal charges. However, the tragedy led to a massive and total reform of the Rio police. New training protocols were established for hostage situations and the use of force. The commanders who gave the orders were forced to resign from their positions. The city had to face the reality of its own systemic and deep failures. The public demanded better for the future. The aftermath of the Bus 174 crisis left a permanent scar. The footage of the standoff is still used as a training tool for police. It serves as a grim example of what happens when a situation is poorly managed. The young hostage, Geisa Fermo Gonçalves, is remembered as a symbol of the innocent victims. Her death forced a conversation about the social inequality that led to the event. The bus line was eventually changed to remove the number from the city streets. The memory remained. Sandro's life and death became the subject of several documentaries and a feature film. His story highlighted the cycle of violence that exists for the poor in the city. People began to look at the Candelaria massacre again with new and more critical eyes. They realized that the trauma of the past will always return to haunt the present. The standoff was not just about one man on a bus with a pistol. It was about a society that had failed to protect its most vulnerable children. The camera's never off. The crowd that swarmed the police van that day was a sign of a deeper anger. People felt that the justice system was broken and that they had to intervene. The image of the police van being rocked by the mob is a powerful one. It shows the moment when the authority of the state was completely and totally lost. The city of Rio de Janeiro would never look at a bus the same way. The salt air of the coast still carries the echoes of that long and hot afternoon in the sun. Geisa was an assistant teacher who was just trying to get home to her family. She had no connection to Sandro or the police or the political situation of Rio. Her life was ended by the very people who were supposed to keep her safe. This realization was the most painful part of the tragedy for the entire country. The memorial for her is a quiet place where people still go to leave flowers. They remember the woman who wrote a message in lipstick on a glass window. She was an innocent hero. The footage of the crisis remains one of the most famous examples of live news. It is a raw and unfiltered look at a tragedy as it happens. There were no edits and no filters to hide the brutal reality of the failure. This transparency was both a gift and a curse for the people of Brazil. It forced them to see the truth about their own police force and society. The power of the image is something that can never be fully undone. The television screen still glows in the dark room. Today, the streets of Rio are still busy and full of the same chaotic energy. The sun still beats down on the pavement where the bus once sat idling, but the lessons of that day are still being taught in the police academy. They are a reminder that every choice has a consequence that can be fatal. The ghost of bus 174 still travels through the city at night. It is a story of a day when the whole world watched and no one could stop the blood on the street. The crowd swarms a police van as the cameras continue to roll in the street. The metallic blue paint of the van reflects the harsh and bright sunlight. This image is a final and haunting testament to the chaos of that day. That same sense of a crowd and a hidden predator exists in other places. Sometimes the danger is not a man on a bus in a crowded city. Sometimes it is a former officer who knows exactly how to hide. We are moving from the city to a quiet mountain trail. The shouting crowd in the streets of Brazil begins to fade away. The camera pulls back until the city is just a speck of light. We travel thousands of miles across the dark and empty South Atlantic. We arrive at the southern tip of the African continent. Here, a massive flat-topped mountain looms over a sleeping city. The silence here is heavy and absolute in the cold night air. This is Table Mountain in Cape Town, a place of ancient and quiet peace. It is a sharp contrast to the chaos we just witnessed. A hiker stops to catch his breath on a steep, rocky ledge. He looks up and sees a man in a police uniform. The officer is standing perfectly still among the gray rocks and brush. The hiker feels a sudden wave of relief at the sight. He expects a friendly greeting or a warning about the narrow trail, but the man in the uniform does not say a single word. He slowly raises a rifle and aims it directly at the hiker's chest. The peace of the mountain is shattered by a single shot. What do you do when the person you are supposed to call is the predator? This question terrified the people of Cape Town for months on end. Couples began to disappear from the most beautiful spots on the mountain trails. Families were afraid to go for their usual Sunday afternoon walks in nature. The authorities were stumped by a killer who seemed to know their moves. He was like a ghost who moved through the rocks and the finbows. Everyone was looking for a monster, but they were looking for a civilian. In the early months of the year 2000, the trails were busy. Table Mountain is a world-famous landmark that attracts millions of visitors annually. People come from all over the globe to climb the steep paths. They want to see the incredible views of the ocean and the city. For many locals, the mountain is a backyard playground for exercise and peace. It felt like the safest place in the world to be outside. No one imagined that a hunter was watching them from the high ridges. The people of Cape Town lived a normal and very active outdoor life. On weekends, the hiking trails were filled with families and young couples. They would pack lunches and carry water bottles for the long climb up. The air was fresh and smelled of salt from the nearby Atlantic Ocean. It was a community that trusted the land and the people on it. This sense of security was the first thing the killer decided to take. He chose his targets when they were at their most relaxed and happy. The first sign of trouble was a series of abandoned cars near trails. These vehicles belonged to people who had gone for a short morning hike. They never returned to their cars to drive home to their families. The police initially thought these were simple accidents or hikers who got lost. They searched the deep ravines and the thick brush for any sign of life. But as the number of missing people grew, the tone of the search changed. The mountain was holding on to its secrets with a very cold grip. Search teams eventually found the remains of a young couple in a ravine. They had been shot multiple times with a small caliber weapon from distance. There was no sign of a robbery or any other obvious motive. The killer had left their wallets and their expensive hiking gear behind them. It was a cold and senseless act of violence in a beautiful place. The news of the discovery sent a shockwave of fear through the entire city. People began to realize that a predator was stalking the scenic peaks. A survivor eventually came forward with a very strange and specific detail for police. He had been attacked while hiking, but managed to roll down a hill. He caught a glimpse of his attacker as he was escaping the area. He described a man wearing tactical clothing with a very distinct pattern on it. The witness said the fabric had black and white stripes like a zebra. This strange detail gave the investigation a new and much-needed focus point. The police began to search for the man in the zebra clothes. The crime scene was a tactical nightmare for the forensic teams that arrived. The killer chose spots that gave him a clear view of the trails. He would hide in the rocks, hundreds of feet above his intended targets. This allowed him to fire from a position of total and absolute safety. He used the natural terrain of the mountain to hide his muzzle flash. The investigators found very few physical clues left behind in the dirt and stone. The mountain was a perfect hunting ground for a professional killer. Detectives began to sift through the bullet casings found at the various sites. They realized the killer was using a very rare type of ammunition. These were high-quality shells used mainly by professional marksmen and police units. This was a critical turning point that changed the direction of the case. It suggested that the killer was not just a random person with a gun. He had access to specialized equipment that was not available to the general public. The search moved inside the local police departments. The investigators looked at every person who had recently left the force in Cape Town. They were looking for a man with tactical training and a grudge. They found a former officer named Baron Van Wyck who fit the profile. Barend had a reputation for being a loner who was obsessed with weapons. He spent a lot of his free time on the mountain trails alone. He knew the terrain better than almost anyone else in the local police force. His former colleagues began to view him with a new suspicion. A surveillance team was assigned to watch Baron's house around the clock for days. They saw him packing a rifle case into his car in the dark. He drove toward the base of Table Mountain before the sun came up. The officers followed him at a distance, using their own tactical training to hide. Barend moved through the brush with the silence of a professional mountain hunter. He did not know that his former brothers in arms were now hunting him. The tension was at a breaking point for everyone. The police finally moved in to arrest Barend at his home in the city. They found a collection of tactical gear that matched the witness's description perfectly. There was a jacket with a distinct black and white zebra pattern on it. They also found the rare ammunition that matched the casings from the murder scenes. Barend did not look like a monster when he was caught in his kitchen. He looked like a normal man who had once sworn to protect the city. The betrayal was now official. The reenactment of the crimes showed a truly terrifying level of cold calculation. Barend would use his binoculars to scan the trails from a hidden ridge. He would wait for hours until a couple was in the perfect position. He treated the hikers like they were nothing more than targets on a range. He would fire with precision and then vanish into the rocks before anyone noticed. He used his knowledge of police radio frequencies to avoid any nearby patrols. He was a master of the hunt. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about this particular case. It speaks to the absolute worst of human nature, when authority is used to destroy. We want to believe that the badge is a shield for the weak and innocent. But in this case, the badge was just a tool for a silent hunter. I do not know about you, but that level of betrayal is hard to stomach. We look at a man in uniform and we feel safe. Then we realize it was all a lie. The legal outcome for Baron van Wyk was a series of life sentences. He was convicted of multiple counts of murder and attempted murder in the city. The judge noted that his crimes were particularly heinous because of his former profession. He had used the skills he learned from the state to kill its citizens. Baron showed no emotion as the sentence was read aloud in the quiet court. He was led away to a high-security prison to spend his life. He would never see the mountain again. The aftermath of the zebra killings left a permanent stain on the local trails. The beautiful views are now haunted by the memory of the people who died. The police force had to work for years to regain the trust of the public. People still look over their shoulders when they are hiking in isolated areas today. The story of Baron van Wyk is a reminder that danger can wear many faces. Even the people we trust to save us can hide a dark secret. The fynbos grows over the sights. A pair of binoculars sits on a wooden shelf in a quiet evidence room. They once scanned the peaceful trails for a target in the bright morning sun. Now they are just a piece of plastic and glass with a number. That same sense of a professional life hiding a dark secret exists in other places. Sometimes the monster is not a policeman on a mountain trail in South Africa. Sometimes it is a respected doctor who listens to classical music in his clinic. We are moving from the peak. A police officer drops a silver badge into a clear plastic evidence bag in the room. The metal clinks against the surface as the bag is sealed with a label. This badge once stood for protection and the rule of law in the city. Now it is a symbol of a betrayal that shocked an entire nation of people. That same sense of a respected professional hiding a monster can be found everywhere. Sometimes the killer wears a white coat and carries a sharp scalpel. We are moving to Mexico City. The silver badge in the evidence bag represents a hero who became a monster. We are leaving the rugged slopes of the mountains for the refined air of a clinic. The smell of cold rock is replaced by the sterile scent of rubbing alcohol. In Mexico City, a man hangs his white medical coat on a wooden door. He is a doctor who spent his life studying how to keep people alive. But his private office holds secrets that no patient would ever want to know. The transition from protector to predator is now complete in the heart of the city. A record player spins a beautiful Beethoven symphony in a very clean medical room. The music is loud and fills every corner of the sterile clinical space. Dr. Librado stands near his desk and carefully cleans his thin wire glasses. On the floor behind him, a young man lies perfectly still on the white tiles. The doctor does not look down or show any sign of panic or fear. He simply adjusts his glasses and enjoys the swelling sound of the classical music. To him, this is not a crime, but a work of art. How can a man dedicated to saving lives be so obsessed with taking them? This is the central mystery that would leave the medical community in a state of shock. Dr. Cesar Armando Librado was a man of high culture and very deep medical knowledge. He was respected by his peers and loved by the many patients he served daily. No one could imagine that his surgical skills were being used for a dark purpose. He was a monster who hid behind the mask of a healer and a gentleman. To understand this tragedy, we must look at the reputation the doctor had built. He was known throughout Mexico City as a brilliant and very sophisticated medical professional. His clinic was located in a wealthy neighborhood and was always full of patients. People traveled from all over the country to seek his expert advice on their health. He was a man who spoke softly and always listened to his patients with care. He seemed to be the perfect example of a dedicated and compassionate modern physician. In his normal life, Dr. Librado was a lover of fine arts and classical music. He spent his evenings at the opera or attending gallery openings in the city. He lived in a beautiful house filled with expensive books and very rare antiques. His colleagues saw him as a man of refined taste and superior intellectual ability. He was often invited to speak at medical conferences about his successful clinical trials. There was no hint of the darkness that was growing inside his very brilliant mind. Patients trusted him with their most private secrets and their physical well-being every day. They felt safe in the sterile and quiet environment of his well-appointed office. The doctor would often play soft music to help his patients feel more relaxed. He had a way of making people feel like they were the only person. This trust was the very foundation of his long and successful medical career in the city. He was a pillar of the community who was above any possible suspicion. The trigger event began when a series of young men started to go missing. These individuals had very little in common, except for one specific and hidden detail. They had all visited the doctor's clinic for private consultations in the late evening. Their families reported that they were in good health before they vanished without a trace. The police initially saw no connection between the victims and the respected medical doctor. They believed the men had simply moved away to find work in other regions. The crime scene was hidden beneath the floorboards of the doctor's very clean clinic. Dr. Liberado had built a soundproofed basement that was accessible only through a hidden door. This room was equipped with surgical tools and various chemical vats for his work. It was a place where the music of Beethoven could play without being heard. The doctor called this space his laboratory for the cleansing of the human soul. It was a chamber of horrors that was hidden in plain sight from the world. The investigation took a turn when a relative of a victim became very suspicious. This man refused to believe that his brother had just walked away from his life. He began to watch the clinic every night from a parked car across the street. He noticed that the doctor stayed very late and often carried heavy black bags. The relative approached the police with his observations, but they were initially very dismissive. They did not want to investigate a man as prominent as the famous Dr. Liberado. The relative continued his own private search for the truth about his missing brother. He began to track the specific times that young men entered the medical clinic. He noticed a pattern that the police had completely overlooked in their initial reports. Every man who entered after the sun went down never seemed to walk out again. This observation was finally enough to convince a young detective to take a closer look. A search warrant was eventually granted for the doctor's office and his private residence. The critical turning point came when investigators entered the soundproofed basement of the clinic. They were immediately struck by the overwhelming smell of chemicals used in professional taxidermy. They found jars filled with human remains that had been preserved with great surgical care. The doctor had kept these items as trophies of his many successful cleansing rituals. They also found a collection of personal items belonging to the many missing young men. The truth was far more horrific than anyone had ever dared to imagine. The discovery of the trophies proved that the doctor was a serial predator of men. He had used his medical knowledge to lure his victims into a fatal trap. The police found a hidden ledger that documented each of his crimes in great detail. He had written about the music he played during each of the many murders. He described the process of taking a life as if it were a surgical procedure. The Mexican Chikatilo was a man who had completely lost his grip on human reality. The reenactment of the cases showed a terrifying and very methodical step-by-step process. Dr. Liberado would invite a young man into his office for a private health talk. He would offer them a drink that was spiked with a powerful and fast-acting drug. Once the victim was unconscious, he would move them into the hidden basement laboratory. He would then start his record player and begin his horrific work with a scalpel. He acted as the conductor of a symphony that ended in a cold death. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about this particular case. We all look at doctors as the people who are supposed to be our heroes. They spend years learning how to heal the body and save lives from the dark. But Dr. Liberado had every reason to be a hero, and he chose a nightmare. I don't know about you, but that fact really sends chills down my spine. Imagine being on that table while the beautiful music plays in the sterile room. The legal outcome for the symphony killer was the maximum sentence allowed by the law. He was convicted of multiple counts of murder and the desecration of human remains. During the trial, he remained calm and even smiled when the evidence was presented. He claimed that he was performing a service for the world by removing the weak. The judge called him a monster who had betrayed the most sacred trust of humanity. He was sentenced to life in a high-security prison without any parole. The aftermath of the case left the medical community in a state of total shock. The betrayal of the white coat was a blow that many doctors felt very deeply. New regulations were put in place to monitor the activities of private medical clinics. People became more cautious about who they trusted with their lives and their secrets. The story of Dr. Librado remains a dark warning about the potential for hidden evil. Even the most cultured and educated person can hold a very dark heart. The needle on the record player eventually reached the end of the long symphony. The music stopped and was replaced by the cold silence of a prison cell. The records and the trophies were all taken away as evidence of the horrific crimes. That same sense of a household falling into a state of total chaos exists. Sometimes the danger is not a doctor in a city like Mexico City today. Sometimes it is a woman in a kitchen with a very sharp butcher knife. A surgical scalpel reflects a red light from a nearby emergency exit in the hallway. This small piece of steel was once a tool used for the preservation of life. In the hands of Dr. Librado, it became a weapon of a cold serial killer. That same sense of a tool being used for a dark purpose is found elsewhere. We are leaving the refined world of the doctor for the heat of a kitchen. A woman is preparing a meal that no one will ever want to eat. The record player stops, and the sterile clinic in Mexico City begins to fade away. We are traveling thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean to a small town. We arrive in Aberdeen, Australia, a place known for its quiet and hard-working people. The air here does not smell like medicine or the chemicals of a laboratory. Instead, it smells like the morning dew on the dry and dusty grass. We are standing in front of a small cottage on a very normal street. Inside, a dinner table is set for 3 children with careful detail. Police officers walk through the front door of the house on that Tuesday morning. They are responding to a call about a neighbor who did not show up. As they step into the hallway, they see something hanging from a wooden doorway. It looks like a heavy coat or a suit of clothes in the shadow. But as they get closer, they realize it is the entire skin of a man. It has been removed with professional care and hung up on a meat hook. The veteran officers stop in their tracks, unable to process the sight before them. The officers move past the hallway and enter the small kitchen near the back. On the stove, a large metal pot is sitting over a low blue flame. Steam is rising from the lid, and the air is thick with a savory smell. They lift the lid and find a head and various vegetables inside the water. The table nearby is perfectly set with plates, forks, and even small name cards. The realization of what was being prepared for the children hits the men like a physical blow. This was not a meal, but a final act of hatred. What kind of rage leads a woman to cook her own husband for dinner? This question would become the center of a case that horrified the entire world. Catherine Knight was a woman who knew exactly how to use a butcher knife. She had spent most of her working life at a large commercial slaughterhouse nearby. To her neighbors, she was a person with a very sharp and dangerous temper. No one imagined she would bring the tools of her trade into her own home. The peaceful town of Aberdeen was about to change forever that day. To understand the tragedy, we have to look back at the life of Catherine Knight. She grew up in a world where violence was a constant and very expected thing. Catherine was a hard worker who was respected for her skills with a knife. She could process a carcass faster than many of the men at the plant. But her personal life was a long trail of broken relationships and explosive fights. She was a woman who demanded total control over every person in her life. Her anger was a silent bomb waiting for a reason to explode. In the mid-90s, Catherine met a man named John Price who worked locally. John was a friendly and well-liked man who wanted a simple, happy life. He was a father who cared deeply for his children and his home. When he met Catherine, he thought he had found a partner who was strong. They moved into the cottage in Aberdeen and tried to build a future together. But the dark fire in Catherine began to show itself almost immediately in the house. The quiet life John wanted was quickly becoming a memory of the past. The relationship between the two was a storm that never seemed to find any peace. Neighbors often heard the sound of shouting and breaking glass late into the dark nights. Catherine was known to use weapons like frying pans or heavy boots during their arguments. On one occasion, she even stabbed John with a small kitchen knife during a fight. John was a big man, but he was terrified of the woman he loved. He stayed because he believed he could help her change her dark ways. He was wrong. The abuse became a regular part of their lives behind the closed cottage door. John would arrive at work with bruises on his face and cuts on his arms. His friends at the local plant urged him to leave her for his safety. They saw the fear in his eyes when her name was mentioned in conversation. John tried to end the relationship several times, but Catherine always found a way back. She would threaten to hurt herself or his children if he ever truly left. He felt like he was trapped in a cage of her design. In early February, John Price finally reached a breaking point that he could not ignore. He realized that the woman he shared a bed with was truly a monster. He went to the local courthouse and filed for a restraining order against Catherine. John also changed the locks on the front door and moved her things out. He told his co-workers that he was finally free and ready to start over. But he also told them that if he did not show up, she killed him. He knew her rage was not finished with him yet. John spent the afternoon of the 29th of February with his close friends. He seemed happy and relieved to have his home back to himself that night. They shared a few drinks and talked about his plans for the future years. John walked back to his cottage as the sun set over the dusty hills. He locked the door and went to sleep in his own bed alone. He did not know that Catherine had a spare key hidden in the garden. She was waiting for the house to grow silent and dark. The neighbor noticed that John's car was still in the driveway the next morning. This was very unusual because John was always the first person at the shop. The neighbor walked over and knocked on the front door, but heard no answer. He looked through a window and saw a trail of blood on the floor. He immediately called the police and waited on the sidewalk with a growing dread. The officers arrived a few minutes later and forced their way into the quiet home. The smell of copper was overwhelming in the hallway. The police entered the master bedroom and found a scene of total and absolute chaos. There was blood on the walls, the ceiling, and every inch of the carpet. The mattress had been slashed, and the furniture was overturned in the violent struggle. They followed the trail of blood into the hallway, where the skin was hanging. It was a sight that many of the men would never forget in their lives. They moved toward the kitchen, hoping to find John alive, but they found something else. The pot was still simmering on the stove. The kitchen was clean except for the items on the stove and the table. Catherine had spent hours cleaning the blood from the tiles and the wooden counters. She had organized the scene with the precision of a professional at a plant. The officers found 2 baked potatoes and a dish of roasted pumpkin on the table. There were even small notes written to each of the children near their plates. It was a domestic scene that had been twisted into something truly demonic and cold. The madness of the woman was on full display. The investigation revealed that Catherine had stayed in the house after the brutal crime. She had prepared the meal and set the table as if it were a holiday. She even took a shower and washed the blood from her hair and skin. When the police found her, she was sleeping in the guest room upstairs. She was under the influence of several pills, but she was otherwise very calm. She did not try to deny what she had done to the man she loved. She spoke about John like he was just another carcass at work. The critical turning point came when the forensic team analyzed the butcher knives. They found a set of specialized tools that Catherine had taken from the plant. These were not regular kitchen knives, but professional instruments for skinning and boning. They were kept in a leather roll and were sharpened to a razor edge. This proved that the attack was not a sudden burst of anger or rage. It was a planned and methodical execution that required a great deal of skill. She had treated the house like her own personal slaughterhouse. The reenactment of the case began with Catherine entering the bedroom in the dark. She was carrying a long knife, and she did not say a word to John. She stabbed him 37 times as he tried to crawl toward the door. The struggle moved from the bed to the hallway, and finally the front porch. John was fighting for his life, but Catherine was a master of her craft. She knew exactly where to strike to cause the most pain and damage. Once he was dead, she dragged him back into the kitchen area. The second part of the reenactment was even more horrific for the investigators to hear. Catherine used her professional skills to remove the skin from John's body in one piece. This is a task that takes years of training and a very steady hand. She then decapitated him and placed his head in the large metal pot. She carved pieces of meat from his legs and prepared them with the vegetables. She was treating her husband like a piece of livestock meant for a feast. The coldness of her actions was beyond any human understanding. Now, let's pause for a moment. I want you to really think about this from a different angle. What if John Price had left the house just one day earlier than he did? He knew that she was coming for him, and he even warned his own friends. He had the locks changed and the papers signed to keep her away forever. But he stayed in that house because it was his home and his sanctuary. I don't know about you, but that fact really sends chills down my spine. The very place he felt safe became a trap. The legal outcome for Catherine Knight was a historic moment in the Australian system. She pleaded guilty to the murder of John Price during the early court hearing. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of any parole ever. This was the first time a woman in Australia had received such a sentence. The judge stated that her crimes were so gruesome that she must never be free. She was a permanent danger to every person who might ever cross her path. She will die in a cell for her crimes. The aftermath of the Aberdeen butcher case left a permanent scar on the small town. The cottage where the crime occurred sat empty for many years after the event. Neighbors still speak in low voices when they talk about the woman with the knife. The story of Catherine Knight is taught in every criminology class in the country. It is a reminder that domestic violence can reach a level of absolute madness. The children of John Price were left with a legacy of horror that no one should bear. The memory remains. The town of Aberdeen is still a quiet place where people work hard every day. The slaughterhouse where Catherine worked is still in operation near the hills. But the name Catherine Knight is never mentioned within those white metal walls anymore. The workers there know the story, and they know the power of the tools. They respect the knives, and they respect the thin line between life and death. The air is still clear, and smells of the morning dew on the grass. The past is a shadow that never quite goes away. A sharp butcher hook hangs from a wooden door frame in the back room. It is a simple piece of metal that was designed for a very specific job. In this house, it became the centerpiece of a crime that no one could imagine. This image is a final and haunting testament to the rage of Catherine Knight. That same sense of a household turned upside down can be found everywhere. Sometimes the danger is not a woman with a knife in Australia today. Sometimes it is a man who stays in your house after. The table is still set for 3 children in the quiet and dark kitchen. The plates are empty and the name cards are standing perfectly straight on the wood. This scene of a meal that was never eaten is a truly chilling sight. It shows the moment when a mother decided to destroy her own entire family. That same sense of a home becoming a tomb is found in our final story. We are moving from the heat of Australia to the cold of Japan. A family is waiting for a guest who never leaves the room. The empty plates on the table in Australia stay silent in the dark. We are leaving that house and the rage that filled its rooms. We are traveling north across the wide ocean to the city of Tokyo. It is a quiet residential area in the Setagaya district. The houses here are close together, but the neighbors keep to themselves. It is the end of the year 2000 and the air is cold. A small light is burning in the window of a modern family home. Inside, someone is sitting in front of a computer screen in the dark. The person at the desk is not the man who lives there. He is a stranger who has just committed a series of terrible acts. The bodies of the family are lying in the rooms nearby, but the killer is not running away from the scene into the night. He is calmly browsing the internet and trying to buy theater tickets. He stays in the house for many hours while the world is sleeping. He eats food from the kitchen and even takes a nap on the sofa. This is a chilling stranger in the house story. How do you lose a killer who left behind his entire identity? He left his clothes, his bag, and his DNA in the house. The police have more evidence in this case than almost any other. Yet, after more than 20 years, the man is still a ghost. He lived in the crime scene as if it were his own home. He was not afraid of being caught by the authorities or the neighbors. The mystery of the Setagaya family tragedy is a puzzle with no clear solution. It is a case that remains open today. The date was the 30th of December in the year 2000. Most families in Japan were preparing for the coming New Year festivities. The Miyazawa family was no different as they finished their holiday shopping. Mikio and Yasuko were looking forward to a quiet week with their children. Their daughter Nina was 8, and their son Ray was only 6 years old. They lived in a peaceful neighborhood where children usually played in the streets. The house was full of the warmth and the light of the season. Mikio Miyazawa worked for a marketing company and was known as a kind man. His wife Yasuko ran a small tutoring school from their comfortable home. They were a successful and happy family with a bright future ahead of them. Neighbors described them as polite people who were always willing to help others. The family was busy setting up their decorations for the traditional celebration. They had no idea that a predator was watching their house from the shadows. The cold winter night was about to turn into a nightmare for everyone. An intruder approached the back of the house late in the evening hours. He climbed up a tree and entered through a small second-story window. The killer moved through the house with a level of terrifying and silent confidence. He found young Ray sleeping in his bed and attacked him first. The boy was strangled in his sleep before he could even cry out. The sounds of the struggle alerted the father, who was working downstairs. Mikio ran toward the stairs to protect his family from the unknown threat in the dark. Mikio met the killer on the stairs and tried to fight him off. The intruder was armed with a very sharp and specific type of knife. He stabbed Mikio multiple times until the father collapsed on the floor. The killer then moved to the upper floor where Yasuko and Nina were. They were hiding in the attic space, hoping to escape the violent attack. But the killer found them and showed no mercy to the mother and daughter. The house grew silent as the final life was taken in the dark rooms. The grandmother of the children arrived the next morning to check on them. She found the front door was locked, but no one answered her calls. She used her own key to enter and found the body of Mikio. She screamed and ran through the house to find her daughter and grandchildren. The police were called and arrived to find a scene of total horror. They expected the killer to be long gone from the area of the crime, but the evidence showed that he had only left a few minutes earlier. The killer had spent 10 hours in the house after the family died. He used the family computer to browse the web at 2 different times. He also ate several containers of ice cream and a melon from the kitchen. The intruder used the family first aid kit to treat a cut. He left behind his sweatshirt and a muffler in the middle of the room. He even folded his clothes neatly before he walked out the door. It was as if he had moved in for the night with the family. The police found a hip bag that contained several very specific and rare items. It held grains of sand that only come from a specific desert area. They also found traces of a highlighter pen used by certain students. The DNA of the killer was found on almost every surface of the home. This gave the investigators a perfect profile of the man they were hunting. They were certain that an arrest would be made within a few weeks. But as the months turned into years, the trail grew cold and silent. Investigators looked into thousands of leads and questioned many different local people. They traveled to other countries to follow the trail of the desert sand. Some believed the killer was a former soldier from a foreign military base. Others thought he was a young man with a deep and boiling resentment. But none of the DNA samples matched the profile found in the house. The killer had vanished into a city of millions without leaving a single trace. The case became a source of great frustration for the Tokyo police. A specific clue about the sweatshirt led police to a small clothing store. They were able to track down the few people who had bought that item, but the trail stopped at a man who had since moved away. The fingerprints left on the computer and the furniture did not match anyone. The high level of evidence was actually making the case more difficult to solve. Every lead seemed to end in a brick wall or a dead-end street. The killer was a ghost with a very clear and physical face. Imagine the killer sitting in that quiet house with the computer screen glowing. He is browsing through the family photos while the bodies are in the rooms. He is not in a hurry to leave the scene of his terrible crimes. He sits in the chair and clicks the mouse to buy tickets for a show. The sound of the keyboard is the only thing in the house for hours. He feels safe and comfortable in the space he has just violently taken. He is the master of this dark and silent world. The killer goes to the kitchen and opens the refrigerator to find a snack. He eats the ice cream and leaves the empty containers on the table. He treats the home like a hotel where he can rest and recover. He washes his hands in the sink and uses the family's own soft towels. He is completely indifferent to the lives he has just ended nearby. This lack of emotion is what makes the case so terrifying to everyone. He is a predator who has no fear of being discovered at all. More than 280,000 investigators have worked on this case. It is the most expensive and long-running investigation in Japanese history. The house where the murders happened was kept as evidence for 20 years. It was recently demolished, leaving only a small memorial park on the site. The killer is still out there somewhere, perhaps living a very normal life. He carries the secret of that cold winter night in the district of Setagaya. He is the man who stayed for 10 hours in a house. Now, let's pause for a moment and look at this from a different view. I want you to really think about the reality of this situation. Imagine being in your own home, where you should be the most safe. Someone else is there with you, moving through the rooms in the dark night. They are living your life while you are no longer able to speak. I don't know about you, but that idea really sends chills down my spine. We are never truly as alone as we think we are. Think about that person browsing the internet in the middle of a crime scene. They are not a movie monster or a ghost from a local legend. They are a real human being who walked the same streets as you. They ate the same food and used the same types of technology daily. This fact makes the mystery feel much closer and much more dangerous to us. The stranger in the house is a fear that we all carry deep inside. It is the shadow that stays when the light goes out. The family of the victims still waits for a single piece of news. They have lived with the silence and the unanswered questions for decades now. The grandmother who found them passed away without ever knowing the truth of it. The legacy of the Miyazawa family is one of tragedy and a mystery. The police still offer a large reward for any information about the killer. They refuse to give up until the man with the sweatshirt is caught. The search continues through the crowded streets and the quiet neighborhoods. An ice-cold melon sits on a kitchen counter in the bright morning. It is a simple piece of fruit that represents a final meal. The killer left it there after he finished his night in the house. This image is a haunting reminder of the domestic nature of the crime. It shows how the ordinary and the horrific can exist in one room. The house is gone now, but the melon is still in the files. It is a silent witness to a story that has no ending. The rain is still falling outside your window as we reach the end. The stories we have heard tonight are reminders of the dark world. They show us that the strange and the real are often one thing. From the streets of Rio to the quiet neighborhoods of Tokyo, danger exists. We have traveled far and seen things that are hard to believe, but the journey has come to a close for this particular night. It is time to step back from the edge of the abyss for a rest. Thank you for spending your time with me through these many dark paths. I truly appreciate your support and your presence here tonight in the rain. Please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. I am glad we could share these moments of mystery and shadow together. You have been a great companion for this long and winding journey tonight. It is always a pleasure to tell these tales to such a crowd. Stay safe out there and look after one another in the dark. I want you to get as comfortable as you possibly can right now. Close your eyes and feel the weight of the day leaving your body. The rain is a soft and steady curtain of sound for your mind. You are in a warm and safe place where nothing can reach you. Let your breathing slow down and match the rhythm of the falling drops. The world is far away and the shadows are now just soft. You are ready to drift off into a deep and peaceful sleep tonight. The rain is tapping gently on the glass of your bedroom window. It is a slow and steady sound that washes away your worries. The air in your room is warm and the blankets are heavy. You feel a sense of total and absolute safety in your bed. Your toes are warm and your legs are starting to feel heavy. Every muscle in your body is relaxing and sinking into the mattress. You are drifting away from the sounds of the night and the pressure of time. Imagine a small house in a field where the grass is very green. The rain is falling softly on the roof of the quiet home. You are sitting by a fireplace with a warm drink in hand. The flames are dancing and casting a soft glow on the walls. You feel the heat on your skin and the peace in your heart. There is no one else around and the world is very silent. You are safe and you are warm, and you are very tired from the long day. The sound of the rain is like a lullaby for your weary mind. It repeats over and over in a calm and soothing rhythmic pattern. Your eyes are closed and you can see the soft gray clouds. They are moving slowly across a very wide and peaceful morning sky. You are floating on a cloud that is as soft as silk. The wind is a gentle whisper that tells you to rest now. You are falling deeper into a world of quiet and beautiful dreams. Your breathing is slow and deep and very steady in the dark room. With every breath you take, you feel more and more relaxed inside. The weight of the blankets is a warm hug for your soul. You are sinking down into a cloud of soft and white cotton. The world of stories and shadows is now a distant memory. You are here in the present, and you are completely safe. Let the darkness be a soft and comforting blanket for your heavy eyes. The rain on the window is a song that never ends tonight. It is a song of peace and a song of deep rest. You are drifting in a boat on a very calm lake. The water is still, and the mist is soft and very white. You can hear the sound of the oars dipping into the water. It is a rhythmic and soothing sound that leads you home. You are almost there, and the shore is waiting for you in the light of the moon. The lights are low and the stars are hidden behind the rain. You are in a dream where the sun is always soft. You feel the cool breeze on your face as you rest. The grass is soft and the birds are singing a lullaby. You are so very tired and your mind is so quiet. Everything is as it should be in this peaceful and dark moment. You are falling into a sleep that is deep and long and safe from the cold world. Rest your head on the pillow and let the thoughts go. They are like leaves floating down a very slow and quiet river. They drift away from you until they are gone from sight. You are left with only the sound of the soft rain. It is the only thing that matters in this safe place. You are surrounded by a cocoon of warmth and very soft light. Sleep is coming for you, and it is a welcome friend in the dark night. Good night to you, and may your dreams be very kind tonight. The rain will stay with you until the morning light arrives. You are safe, and you are loved, and you are resting. Let the silence take you into the deep and quiet dark. The story has ended, and the rest is for your mind. Sleep now, and find the peace that you have earned tonight. I will be here when the sun comes up again. Good night to you. Some details in these stories have been fictionalized or reenacted to enhance the dramatic effect and cinematic experience for viewers. However, these changes do not affect the core content, objective facts, or the nature of the actual events that took place.